The grand ballroom was a shimmering ocean of everything expensive. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling like frozen waterfalls, casting 1,000 tiny rainbows across the walls. Men in suits that cost more than most cars stood in serious-looking huddles, their low conversations a steady hum beneath the gentle music. Women in glittering dresses laughed with sounds that were a little too high and a little too loud, their eyes scanning the room even as they spoke to one another. It was the biggest, most luxurious party of the year, and Jack, the man who had paid for most of it, felt a deep, heavy boredom settle in his chest. He stood near a towering ice sculpture that was slowly melting into a useless puddle, a feeling he understood all too well. He had everything you could possibly buy, but in this room full of hundreds of people, he had never felt more alone. His money brought him things and attention, but it never seemed to bring him real peace or a genuine smile. He was trapped in a beautiful golden cage of his own making. His eyes, tired of looking at the same faces he saw at every one of these events, drifted across the crowded dance floor, and then they stopped. His breath caught in his throat. It was like seeing a ghost, a beautiful, familiar ghost from his past. There, standing near a large window that looked out over the city lights, was Lily. Or at least he was certain it was Lily. She had the same long dark hair that fell in soft waves, the same delicate nose, the same height and way of standing. A wave of old, complicated feelings washed over him. He and Lily had dated for a short, intense time, years ago. It had been exciting, but ended without much drama, simply fading away, as these things sometimes do. Seeing her now sent a jolt through his system. It was the first real feeling he'd had all night. Without really thinking, his feet began to move. He weaved through the crowd, his focus entirely on the woman by the window. He didn't notice the way. Her dress was a softer, simpler style than the one Lily would have chosen. He didn't see the shy, uncertain way she held her champagne flute, as if she wasn't quite sure what to do with it. He only saw the face he remembered. As he got closer, he saw she was looking out the window, a small, wistful smile on her face, seemingly lost in her own world, a world away from the noisy party. "Lily," he said, his voice cutting through the noise as he stepped up beside her. "It's been a long time." The woman started, turning to look at him with wide, surprised eyes. They were a softer, warmer shade of brown than Lily's, he noted absently. But his brain, convinced of who she was, ignored the detail. "You'll remember me," he continued, with a confident smile, leaning against the window frame. "I have to say, you look exactly the same. It's like no time has passed at all. I was just thinking about that weekend we spent at the lake house. Do you ever think about that?" The woman blinked, a small frown appearing on her forehead. She looked genuinely confused and a little bit alarmed. She took a small step back, creating more space between them. I think you have me confused with someone else," she said, her voice much quieter and gentler than Lily's confident tone. It was like the difference between a violin and a trumpet. Jack let out a low, charming laugh, still not understanding, confused. "Come on, Lily," smacked Jack. "There's no need to be shy now." She looked directly at him, her cheeks turning a faint shade of pink. She straightened her shoulders, a tiny act of bravery. "My name," she said, her voice a little firmer, "is Maya. Lily is my sister, my twin sister." The words landed on Jack like a physical blow. All the smooth confidence drained from his face, replaced by a hot wave of pure embarrassment. He felt like the biggest fool in the entire city. Of course, the slight differences in her face, the quieter voice, the shy demeanor, it all clicked into place with a painful clarity. This wasn't the outgoing, fiery Lily he'd once known. This was her mirror image, a complete stranger he had just bombarded with personal memories.
"Oh," he said, the word coming out as a stunned breath. "Oh no, I'm so incredibly sorry. That was terribly rude of me." He ran a hand through his hair, completely mortified. "You just look so much like her. I feel like an idiot." Maya watched.
His entire demeanor changed from cool and collected to flustered and apologetic. She saw the genuine regret in his eyes, and her initial alarm began to fade, replaced by a strange sense of curiosity. She knew all about her sister's past with the billionaire Jack. Of course, Lily had talked about him often enough, his charm, his wealth, his intensity. But the man standing in front of her now, blushing like a schoolboy who had been caught misbehaving, didn't seem intense or scary. "You seemed real." "It's okay," she said, and a small, genuine smile touched her lips for the first time. "It happens more often than you'd think."
"I'm used to it. That doesn't make it any less embarrassing for me," Jack replied, shaking his head. He looked at her properly now, really, looking at Maya. He saw the kindness in her eyes, the patience in her smile. The party noise around them seemed to fade into a distant buzz.
"Can I start over properly this time? Hello, my name is Jack. It's very nice to meet you, Maya." He held out his hand. Maya hesitated for only a second before placing her much smaller hand in his. A simple, polite handshake, but for both of them, it felt significant. A new beginning. "It's nice to meet you, Jack," she said. They stood there for a moment, just looking at each other, the awkwardness of the first meeting melting away into something new and uncertain. Jack found he didn't want the conversation to end. He didn't want to go back to his boring, lonely circle of wealthy acquaintances. "Can I get you a fresh drink?" he asked, nodding toward her full glass. "Maybe we could find a quieter spot to talk." "I'd like to hear about you, Maya." "Not your sister?"
"You!" Mia's heart gave a little flutter. No one at this party had looked at her and seen just her. They always saw Lily's twin. But Jack was looking right at her, and he seemed truly interested. She felt a spark of courage ignite inside her.
"I'd like that," she said softly. "A quieter spot sounds nice." And as Jack led her away from the crowded window toward a secluded balcony where the city lights twinkled like a carpet of stars, the first chapter of their story truly began, not with a confident greeting, but with a clumsy, honest mistake that would change both of their lives forever. The air on the balcony was cool and clean, a welcome escape from the stifling, perfumed warmth of the ballroom. Below them, the city was a sprawling tapestry of light, a silent, pulsing world that felt a million miles away from the chatter they'd left behind. Jack leaned against the stone railing, his expensive suit jacket seeming less like a uniform and more like a costume he was finally allowed to take off. Maya stood beside him, a careful few inches of space between them, her simple dress whispering in the gentle night breeze. For a long moment neither of them spoke. The silence was not the awkward, heavy silence from before, but something new, something fragile and full of potential, like the first quiet second after a snowflake lands. Jack was the first to break it, his voice softer now, stripped of its party-time charm. So he began turning to look at her, his profile outlined by the distant city glow. "Maya, what brings you to a place like this? You don't seem like you're here for the networking." Mia kept her eyes on the horizon, a small, truthful smile playing on her lips. "My sister," she said simply. She said it would be good for me to get out. She said I spent too much time in my own world. She glanced at him, a flicker of self-consciousness in her eyes. I think she was hoping I'd meet someone impressive. And did.
You? Jack asked the question hanging in the air between them.
She met his gaze then, her bravery returning. I'm not sure yet, she replied, her tone light, but her words deliberate. I think I just embarrassed a billionaire by mistaking him for my sister's ex-boyfriend. That's a new one for me. Jack laughed, a real unguarded sound that seemed to surprise even him. The tension finally shattered. Consider me thoroughly embarrassed, he said, and consider the slate wiped clean. He paused, genuinely curious. And what is this world of yours that you spend too much time in? It was the question that unlocked her. Ma's eyes lit up, the last of her shyness melting away as she began to talk about the library where she worked, surrounded by the quiet, dusty smell of old paper and infinite stories. She described the feeling of finding a book that seemed written just for her, of getting lost in adventures and histories and lives that were not her own. She told him about her small apartment with its window seat perfect for reading, and how her favorite thing to do was to sit there with a cup of tea and watch the sky change from blue to black, pinpointed with stars. She didn't talk about fancy restaurants or exotic vacations or any of the things people usually tried to impress him with. She talked about quiet moments and inner landscapes. Jack listened. He truly listened in a way he couldn't remember listening to anyone in years. He wasn't planning his next response or thinking about a business deal. He was just absorbing her words, painting the pictures she described in his mind. He found himself fascinated by the simplicity of her joy. It was a type of wealth he had never been able to acquire. When she finished, she seemed to realize she had been talking for a long time.
I'm sorry, she said, her cheeks flushing again.
I must be boring you. This is all probably very dull compared to all of this. She gestured vaguely back towards the glittering party.
Boring me, Jack repeated, his voice earnest.
Maya, that's the most interesting thing I've heard in years. Sounds peaceful, real. He then began to share his own world, but not the version he presented in magazine interviews. He spoke of the loneliness of a quiet penthouse so large that his own footsteps echoed. He confessed that he sometimes missed the chaotic noise of the college dorm room he'd shared with 3 other guys, a time when he had no money but plenty of friends. He talked about the pressure of always having to beat Jack the Billionaire, a title that felt like a suit of armor he could never take off. He didn't say these things to earn her pity. He said them because for the first time he felt he was speaking to someone who might understand the difference between a price tag and value. They talked for what felt like both a single minute and an entire lifetime. The music from the ballroom faded. The guests began to depart, and the moon traveled across the sky. But on that balcony, time seemed to hold its breath. They discovered a shared love for terrible old black and white movies and a mutual hatred for coconut. They debated the best flavor of ice cream. He was a classic vanilla bean purist. While she argued passionately for the complex joy of Rocky Road, eventually the party was over. The lights inside the ballroom dimmed. Jack walked her to the front of the hotel where a line of cars waited. The night air was cold now, and Mia crossed her arms over her chest. Here, Jack said, shrugging off his jacket and placing it carefully around her shoulders before she could protest. The weight of it was immense, the fabric still warm from his body and smelling faintly of his cologne, something clean and spicy. It felt like an embrace. Thank you, she whispered, her voice small in the vast night. Can I see you again? Jack asked. The question was simple, but his voice was thick with a hope he hadn't felt in a decade. A real date. No ballrooms, no ice sculptures, maybe just a walk. Maya looked up at him, wrapped in the warmth of his jacket, surrounded by the evidence of his world, but seeing only the man who'd been vulnerable with her, the man who had listened. She thought of her quiet apartment, her predictable routine, her safe little world, and she knew with a certainty that shook her to her core that she wanted more. "Yes," she said, and the word felt like a promise.
"I'd like that very much."
He smiled, a true, full smile that reached his eyes and made them crinkle at the corners. He didn't try to kiss her or even touch her hand again. He just nodded, committing the sight of her in his jacket to memory. "Good night, Maya. Good night, Jack." She turned and walked towards her car, the jacket feeling like a secret shield. Jack watched her until she disappeared from view, then stood for a long time on the empty steps, the cold night air no longer feeling cold at all. The city around him was the same, but everything had changed. The quiet space between them on the balcony was no longer empty. It was now filled with the thrilling, terrifying, and wonderful possibility of tomorrow. The following week unfolded for Maya in a series of bright new colors, as if the world had been slightly adjusted into a sharper, more beautiful focus. Her days at the library, once a peaceful solitude, now felt punctuated by a thrilling anticipation. She would find herself staring at a paragraph in a book, the words blurring as her mind replayed the sound of Jack's laugh on the balcony, the earnest look in his eyes when he spoke of his loneliness. The memory was a warm stone she carried in her pocket, her fingers brushing against it constantly for reassurance. When her phone finally buzzed with a text from him, a simple, "Still up for that walk tomorrow," her heart performed a joyful, stuttering rhythm against her ribs. Their first official date was not in a Michelin-starred restaurant or a private jet, but in the city's sprawling Central Park, exactly as he had promised. Jack arrived not in a chauffeur limousine, but driving a surprisingly ordinary, albeit clean car. He was dressed in simple, comfortable clothes, and the absence of his billionaire armor made him seem younger, more approachable, more real. They walked for hours along the winding paths, the autumn leaves crunching satisfyingly under their feet. They talked about everything and nothing, their favorite childhood cartoons, the most embarrassing things that had ever happened to them in school, their dreams that had nothing to do with money or careers. He bought them both ice cream from a street vendor, and they ate it on a park bench watching children play and dogs chase squirrels. It was perfectly, wonderfully normal, and for Maya, it was more magical than any ballroom could ever be.
A second date followed, then a third.
They went to a quiet old cinema that showed classic films and shared a large tub of popcorn. They spent an afternoon in a dusty, forgotten museum, making up silly stories about the people in the portraits. With every hour spent together, the initial connection on the balcony deepened into something sturdy and profound. Maya saw past the public figure to the kind, sometimes weary, and wonderfully funny man beneath. Jack, in turn, was captivated by the quiet strength in Maya, the deep well of empathy she possessed, and the way she found joy in the smallest of details. The pattern of frost on a window pane, the specific melody of a distant wind chime. Yet, as their closeness grew, so did a knot of anxiety in Mia's stomach. The secret she carried, the truth of her own inexperience, began to feel less like a private fact and more like a heavy, invisible wall standing between them. Every time his hand accidentally brushed against hers, sending a jolt of electricity up her arm, the secret whispered to her. Every time he looked at her with a warmth that made her feel both cherished and desired, the weight of it grew. She saw the clear, open affection in his eyes, and she was terrified that her confession would change it, that it would make him see her as a child, a project, or worse, a responsibility he hadn't signed up for. The moment of truth arrived on a cool, clear evening. Jack had cooked dinner for her at his penthouse, a simple pasta dish that was surprisingly delicious. The floor-to-ceiling windows showcased the city lights, but neither of them was looking out. They were seated on his large, comfortable sofa, the remains of their meal on the coffee table, the air thick with unspoken words. The space between them on the couch felt charged, a magnetic field pulling them together. Jack reached out and gently took her hand, his thumb softly stroking her knuckles. The simple touch was his quietest, most powerful question yet. Mia's breath hitched. The moment was her. She could no longer hide behind conversation and laughter. "Jack," she began, her voice barely a whisper. Shep pulled her hand back, folding hers together in her lap, her knuckles white. "There's something I need to tell you." She couldn't look at him, so she focused on a star, twinkling in the distant black sky.
"I've never done this before." "Any of it?" She forced herself to continue.
The words tumbling out in a nervous rush.
"I've never had a serious boyfriend. I've never been in love. I've never even been kissed."
The silence that followed was the most terrifying sound she had ever heard. It seemed to stretch, sucking all the air out of the vast room. She risked a glance at his face, expecting to see disappointment, confusion, or worse, pity. But Jack's expression was unreadable for a long moment. He wasn't looking at her with pity, but with a deep, profound thoughtfulness, as if she had just handed him something incredibly fragile, and he was determining the safest way to hold it. The revelation explained so much. Her initial shyness, the wide-eyed wonder with which she approached everything, the pure, unjaded quality of her heart. He slowly moved closer, not to crowd her, but to close the distance she had created. He didn't reach for her hand again. Instead, he waited until her fearful eyes met his.
"Maya," he said, his voice low and steady, a safe harbor in the storm of her anxiety.
"Thank you for trusting me enough to tell me that." That was all.
No dramatic reaction, no jokes to lighten the mood, just simple, profound gratitude for her trust.
"It doesn't change how I see you," he continued, his gaze unwavering. "It doesn't change how I feel when I'm with you. If anything, it makes what we have feel even more special." He offered her a small, gentle smile. "We don't ever have to do anything you're not ready for."
"This," he said, gesturing between the two of them.
"You and me talking, laughing, just being together. This is everything." The relief that washed over Maya was so powerful it left her trembling. The heavy wall she had built crumbled into dust. The weight was gone, replaced by a soaring, boundless feeling of liberation. He understood. He wasn't running. Later that night he walked her to her door. The hallway was quiet, lit by soft golden sconces. They stood facing each other, the air once again humming with possibility, but this time it was a comfortable, welcome hum. "Good night, Maya," Jack said, his voice soft. He leaned in slowly, giving her every opportunity to turn away. But Maya stood her ground, her heart pounding, not with fear, but with a bright, dazzling anticipation. His lips met hers in a kiss that was impossibly soft, a whisper of a touch, tender and questioning. It was not a kiss of passion, but one of promise. It was a silent vow that he would always be this careful with her heart. It was sweet and gentle and over too soon, but it sent a wave of pure warm light cascading through her entire body. As he pulled away, Mia's eyes fluttered open. She felt dizzy, breathless, and utterly completely happy, her first kiss, and she knew with a certainty that settled deep in her soul that it could not have been more perfect. It was the beginning of everything. The confession, instead of building a wall, had dismantled the final one. In the weeks that followed Jack's gentle understanding, Maya bloomed with a new, quiet confidence. The world seemed to hold a different kind of music, a rhythm she now felt in her very blood. Their kisses, once soft promises at her doorstep, deepened into longer, more conversations without words. A simple good-night peck would linger, transforming into a slow, melting exploration that left them both breathless and leaning against her doorframe, reluctant to let the night end. Jack remained endlessly patient, his hands always gentle, his advances always checking in with a soft question in his eyes that she learned to answer, with a confident smile and a pull of her hands on his shirt, drawing him closer. Their intimacy became a new language they learned together. It was in the way his thumb would trace slow, absent-minded circles on the inside of her wrist as they watched a movie, a touch that sent shivers up her entire arm. It was in the way she gained the courage to run her fingers through the hair at the nape of his neck, feeling him sigh and lean into her touch. They discovered the landscape of each other's bodies, not with frantic urgency, but with a slow, reverent curiosity. A trail of kisses he left along her collarbone. One quiet afternoon on his sofa was a sentence of devotion. The way her hands learned the strong, solid plane of his back was her reply. The air between them crackled with a growing mutual hunger, a delicious tension that was no longer frightening, but a thrilling countdown to a moment they both knew was coming. That moment arrived on a night painted in silver and black.
A fierce, sudden storm had rolled over the city, and they were safe inside Maya's cozy apartment.
The rain lashing against the windows and relentless sheets. They stood watching, the lightning illuminate the sky in dramatic silent flashes, the thunder a distant powerful drum roll. The room was dark, save for the occasional burst of nature's fury, casting their faces in sharp relief for a second before plunging them back into intimate darkness. The electric charge in the air outside seemed to seep through the glass, filling the space around them. Jack stood behind her, his arms wrapped around her waist, his chin resting on her head. They were silent, watching the storm's spectacle. Then, in a particularly brilliant flash of lightning, Maya turned in his embrace. She didn't say a word. She simply reached up, cupped his face in her hands, and brought his lips to hers. This kiss was different from all the others. It was not a question or a promise. It was an answer. It was full of a sure, certain wanting, a deep, resonant yes that had been building for weeks. Understood. He swept her up into his arms, and she buried her face in his neck. Breathing in the familiar safe scent of him, he carried her to her bedroom, a small personal space that felt a world away from his sterile penthouse. The storm continued its rage outside, a powerful, wild soundtrack to the tenderness unfolding within. There, in the soft glow of a single small lamp, with the rain whispering secrets against the pane, they finally came together. Jack was painstakingly slow, infinitely gentle, his every touch a whispered word of affection and reverence. He watched her face, learning what she liked, ensuring her comfort was his only priority. For Maya, it was not a loss of innocence, but a glorious transformation of it. The slight initial sting of pain was fleeting, washed away immediately by an overwhelming wave of sensation and emotion. It was not being taken, but joining. It was a feeling of coming home, of two separate pieces clicking into a perfect whole unity. The storm outside reached its peak as she did, a crashing crescendo of thunder that muffled her soft cry of release against his shoulder. A cry not of pain, but of profound, soul-shaking completion. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the quiet aftermath, the storm now a gentle retreating rumble. The world felt new, washed clean. Jack held her close, her head on his chest, his fingers tracing lazy, loving patterns on her bare skin. The intimacy was deeper now, a quiet, humbling knowledge of each other that settled in their bones. In the profound, peaceful silence, Maya found her voice, a soft murmur against his skin.
"My sister," she whispered. "Lily, a long time ago after you two dated, she told me something once."
She felt Jack's breathing still, his body becoming attentive. "She said that when you were together, she said you told her she was tighter than anyone else." The words felt strange to say, a relic from a past that had nothing to do with the man holding her now. Jack was silent for a long moment, holding her tighter. Then he shifted, rolling onto his side so he could look directly into her eyes, his gaze intense and serious. He brought a hand to her cheek, his thumb stroking her skin. "Maya," he said, his voice low and filled with a conviction that went straight to her heart. "It's not about that. It never was. With her it was just a thing that was said. But with you," he paused, searching for the right words. "With you it's about our hearts fitting together perfectly. It's about this." He placed his hand over his own heart, then over hers. "And with you, Maya, mine finally does." Tears, warm and silent, welled in Maya's eyes and spilled over. They were not tears of sadness or insecurity, but of a joy so profound it had to escape. He had taken a secret fear, a ghost, from her sister's shadow, and had not just dismissed it, but had replaced it with a truth so beautiful it made her chest ache. He saw her, only her, and in his eyes she was not just tight, she was perfect. She was everything. And as they drifted to sleep, wrapped in each other, the last of the storm clouds parted, revealing a sky full of brilliant,
unwavering stars. The seasons turned, painting the city in the soft greens of spring.
the blazing golds of autumn, and finally the crisp, clean whites of a deep winter. Through it all, the world that Ma and Jack had built together only grew more solid, more real. It was a world constructed not of grand gestures and public displays, but of 1,000 small private moments that were their lives inextricably together. It was in the shared sleepy silence of Sunday morning coffee, in the comfortable clutter of Mia's books, slowly colonizing the sleek, minimalist shelves of Jack's penthouse, in the way he now kept her favorite tea in his kitchen cabinet. It was in the way Mia had learned to calm the relentless tension in his shoulders after a difficult day with nothing more than a gentle touch and her quiet presence. Their love was not a roaring fire, but the steady, enduring warmth of a hearth, a constant and safe place to turn to. Jack knew with a certainty that surpassed any business decision he had ever made, that this was the woman he wanted by his side for every remaining sunrise and sunset of his life. The thought of a future without her was not just lonely, it was unimaginable. And so he began to plan. He chose the location with care, remembering the park where they had taken their first tentative steps as aerial couple. He enlisted the help of the park gardeners who, charmed by the story, agreed to a special secret project. He wanted it to be a reflection of them, not a spectacle, but a personal, heartfelt moment. He brought her there on a cool, crystalline afternoon, the winter sun, a pale, brilliant gold in the sky. The bare branches of the trees were outlined sharply against the blue, and their breath misted in the air. He led her along their familiar path, his hand holding hers, his thumb rubbing comforting circles on her glove.
"What's all this?"
Maya asked, noticing their small, subtle changes. A path that seemed clearer than usual, an absence of the usual weekend crowds. "Just a walk," he said, his voice a little tight with a nervousness she hadn't heard in months. "Our walk." He led her to the very bench where they had shared their first ice cream. But the bench was different. The gardeners had carefully, artfully woven flowering winter jasmine and deep green ivy through its wooden slats, transforming the ordinary park bench into a throne of living, fragrant greenery. In the center of the bench where she would normally sit, a single perfect white orchid bloomed, a stark and beautiful contrast to the winter landscape. Maya's hand flew to Hermoth, her eyes wide with dawning understanding.
"Jack," she whispered.
He guided her to sit on the bench, the living garland framing her. He then slowly and deliberately got down on one knee in the cold, hard path before her. He reached into his coat pocket and produced a small velvet box. When he opened it, the diamond inside did not catch the sun in a flashy, blinding glare. Instead, it held the light, scattering it into a quiet, brilliant fire, elegant and timeless, just like the woman he was looking at. "Maya," he began, his voice thick with emotion, yet clear and strong in the still winter air. "You walked into my life because of a mistake, but you have become the single greatest truth I have ever known. You showed me that my wealth was just numbers in an account, and that my real fortune was waiting for me in a quiet library, with a heart full of stories and a smile that could light up the darkest room. You taught me that love isn't about finding someone perfect, but about building something perfect with someone day by day, moment by moment." He took a deep, steadying breath, his eyes locked on hers, shining with unshed tears. "Will you do me the incredible honor of building a forever with me?" Maya, will you marry me? Tears were now streaming freely down Mia's face, but they were tears of pure, unadulterated joy. She did not hesitate for a single second. She launched herself from the bench and into his arms, nearly knocking them both over onto the path.
Yes, she cried out, her voice choked with happy sobs echoing in the quiet park. Yes, Jack, 1,000 times, yes! He laughed, a sound of pure relief and elation, and held her tightly, spinning her once before setting her down and slipping the ring onto her finger.
It fit perfectly, a cool, beautiful weight that felt like it had always belonged there. Their kiss, there in the middle of the winter park, was a seal on their promise, warm and passionate, and full of a future that stretched out endlessly before them. Their wedding was not a society page spectacle. It was held in a sun-drenched garden filled with the people who truly knew and loved them. Lily was there beaming with genuine happiness for her sister.
Any ghosts of the past long since laid to rest.
As Maya walked down the aisle towards Jack, she didn't see a billionaire. She saw the man who had been embarrassed on a balcony, the man who had listened to her talk about books, the man who had held her with such tenderness and reverence that he had transformed her entire world. She saw her best friend, her safe harbor, her love. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, they shared their first dance as husband and wife. His arms were around her, her head was on his shoulder, and the world around them faded into a blissful blur.
My wife, he whispered into her hair, the words sounding like the most precious title in the world.
My husband, she whispered back, her heart so full she thought it might burst. They had journeyed from a mistaken identity to this perfect, unbreakable union. Their story was a testament to the fact that the most beautiful beginnings can come from the most awkward moments, and that forever is built one honest, loving day at a time. They danced on lost in each other, a story complete yet just beginning. If you were moved by Jack and Ma's journey from a clumsy mistake to a timeless love, there are countless other stories waiting to be discovered. To be the first to experience new tales of romance, heart, and unforgettable encounters, make sure to subscribe. A world of new adventures is just a click.